last week. Trump's new ear piercing, right? Isn't that the way some have portrayed it? As though it was no big deal? What actually happened? Lives were lost. One that was targeted was missed. It was an assassination attempt. There was a time in this nation when that very idea of an attempted assassination on a government official or a former and prospective one, as the case would be in this situation, would receive a response of an entire public being absolutely aghast. Once upon a time. But no, we live in a time where people have been willing to adopt the mindset of not my president. Remember that? Hey, Christians, if that came out of your mouth, front pew's open. Let's go ahead and repent. Romans 13, beginning in verse 1. Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. Wherefore, whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God. And whosoever resisteth will receive damnation. For rulers are not a terror unto good works, but to the evil. Wilt thou therefore not be afraid of the power? Do good, and thou shalt receive praise thereof. For he is a minister of God to thee for good. A minister of God for good. That's how Scripture describes the office of government officials. In fact, it's going to be worth noting that Romans 13:3 uses the word ruler, speaking in the plural. Romans 13:4, he, speaking in the singular. Taking rulers as a collective and summing them up into one. We're not just talking about the one that sits in the Oval Office, lives in the White House. We're not just talking about the one that sits on a throne and wears a crown. We aren't just talking about the ones that sit in Congress, drink alcohol, and waste money. We're talking about every government official at every level. Those that we would perceive as worthy of respect, and those that we might be inclined to perceive as not so worthy of respect. How dare any soul who claims to have a respect for the Lord of Lords, King of Kings, that claims to give honor and submission to the heaven of heavens and the one who sits upon the ultimate throne that puts people in positions, how dare any one of us look upon a position of authority in this world and say, not my president? True or false? God knows what He's doing. You believe that? If God knows what He's doing, could it be the case He knows what He's doing even when we can't see the benefit of it? Could it be the case that He knows what He's doing even when it's not as comfortable for us? Even when the one in a particular office might seem to make life harder. Now, when we talk about the role and purpose of government, we could take Romans 13, we could take 1 Timothy chapter 2, and summarize it into three overall ideas. First, when we talk about the role of government, the role of government is going to be to protect the good. Protect the lawful, the law-abiding, to protect those that have a proper mindset of life. Rulers are not a terror to the good, but to the evil. Romans 13:3. That's the way it's supposed to be. The role and purpose of government is to punish the wicked. He's a revenger of God. To execute wrath upon them that do evil. Romans 13:4. So, protect the good, punish the wicked, and connect it with 1 Timothy 2 when Paul said, I will therefore that prayer, supplications, intercessions, giving of thanks be made for all men. For kings and for all that are in authority, 1 Timothy 2. that we may live a quiet and peaceable life with all godliness and honesty. Why are we to be praying for those that are in positions of authority in our government? So that we can live a quiet and peaceful life in all godliness and honesty. By the way, this is the same apostle writing to the same student and protege to whom he would say, all that live godly in Christ Jesus will suffer persecution, 2 Timothy. Yet to the one that he said, hey, there are going to be tough times, he still said, Timothy, pray for a quiet and peaceful life in all godliness and honesty. Sometimes we get it in our noggins that if life doesn't have challenges and difficulties, then we're not doing it right. There are going to be obstacles and challenges, but Scripture enjoins us to pray for a quiet and peaceful life and all godliness and honesty. Is there anything wrong with wanting a nation that upholds morals, that has leaders that are indeed respectable and moral in mindset? Is there anything wrong with holding to the idea that righteousness exalts a nation? A quiet and peaceful life and all godliness and honesty. God never told us to do anything we can't do. And God has never enjoined us to pray for anything that is impossible. So, when we think about the purpose of government, protect the good, punish the wicked, and promote a peaceable life for those that are under its oversight. And civil rulers are called the minister of God. How long do you have to think before a civil ruler comes to mind that challenges your notion of a minister of God? I've got one already. Doesn't take long, does it? We can start at the top. Or we could start at the top 4 years ago. Or we could start at the top 8 years ago. We could start at the top 16 years ago. And we can find plenty of reasons to question some of the decision-making processes, the wisdom, and even the moral fiber of various elected leaders. Minister of God? It didn't come from me. It came from Paul. I don't know about you, but I need to reconcile my mind around that. I've got to figure out how it is that I can look at these people in various roles, and not just in America's history, which is where our minds tend to go, but throughout human history. And how could it be that the powers that be are ordained of God when so many have exercised so much atrocity, violence, immorality? Well, consider three major ideas. The civil government, and the purpose of civil government is to be first the minister of God, the minister of God for good, the minister of God for punishment or wrath. Let's start with the basic idea of to be the minister of God. Already noted that, Romans 13, 3 and 4, they're not a terror to good works, but to the evil. If you would not be afraid of them, do that which is good, and you'll have praise of the same. He's a minister of God to thee for good. If you do that which is evil, be afraid, for he beareth not the sword in vain. A minister of God. Who was it that was the ruler in Iraq at the turn of the millennia and the century? Who was it that was leading a nation called Germany at the end of the 1930s? Who was it that was dictator in Cuba? Or the dictator in Italy? Why is it that we look back over history and it's so easy to identify those with names like Hussein, Hitler, Mussolini? We think back to Castro. We could throw in names like Stalin. God used them. Fact of the matter, God can use ungodly leaders to accomplish His will. Scripture demonstrates it time and time again. How comfortable were God's people living in this place called Egypt at the beginning of the book of Exodus? burdened, oppressed, grievously afflicted. I've heard their cry by reason of their taskmasters, God will tell Moses, Exodus 3. And it's all because there arose a Pharaoh that knew not Joseph. Remember not what Joseph had done for Egypt, nor Joseph's God. And he begins to oppress the Israelites. Okay. God will actually say concerning the position of Pharaoh and the person who held the position by the time Moses is 80 years old and coming back to the nation, Exodus 9:16, for this cause have I raised thee up, to show my power among all nations. God put that obstinate, hard-headed, disobedient leader into position. He let Pharaoh make his choices. God knew how Pharaoh would react to God's words. Who hardened Pharaoh's heart? Pharaoh or God? I'll give you a hint. God said it. Pharaoh didn't like it. God told Pharaoh exactly what the situation was and exactly what right was and exactly what was going to happen. Pharaoh hardened his heart. Thus, God, in His providential interactions with mankind, put a leader into a position that despite the discomfort, the agony, the pain, even the atrocities and deaths that would come about because of his mindset and his leadership, God used it to bring about an ultimate end. And it wasn't just the release of Israel from Egypt. It was the release of Israel from Egypt with a hard-headed Pharaoh saying, "Get out of here." And even 40 years later, as they're about to enter into the land of Canaan, Rahab and all the people of Jericho are saying, "We know about this people and how God brought them out of Egypt and across the Red Sea." God showed who He was through the use of an ungodly leader. Fast forward in history, this time to Isaiah 10. God, through Isaiah, is warning the nation about whom He's going to use to bring about a wake-up call in Judah. Isaiah 10, picking up at verse 8. There we go, verse 5. O Assyrian, rod of my anger. God is going to use the Assyrian, particularly the king of Assyria, Sennacherib, to bring about an oppression and an attack and an invasion inside the nation of Judah. Now, Sennacherib's predecessor Sargon has already taken the northern kingdom of Israel into captivity. But here comes Sennacherib and the Assyrians, and God would describe it as them coming up to the neck. You ever been neck deep in trouble? Come on, you ever been neck deep in trouble? Maybe you were just 8 years old and you knew that you were busted for that piece of candy, but have you ever been neck deep in trouble? Judah was. And they were neck deep in Assyrian trouble. Because that's who God was going to use. Isaiah 10, picking up at verse 6, God says, "I will send him against a hypocritical nation, and against the people of my wrath will I give him a charge, to take the spoil, to take the prey, to tread them down like mire of the streets. Howbeit," verse 7, "he ain't got a clue. He meaneth not so." God used Pharaoh in spite of Pharaoh. God would use the Assyrian in spite of his desires, in spite of his knowledge. He would still providentially use the circumstances to bring about his desired end regarding the punishment of the people of Judah and giving them a wake-up call again that came all the way up to the neck. "He meaneth not so," verse 7, "neither doth he think so in his heart, but it is in his heart to destroy and cut off nations, not a few." God used a selfish, arrogant, domineering dictator to bring about a wake-up call for His people. Pause button, question, can He do the same thing today? Or can He use ungodly, immoral, activist-minded, ambitious political leaders to bring about a wake-up call and a revival among His people and the nation, say, I don't know, the United States of America today. If He could use the Assyrian to come up to the neck of Judah in order to bring about a desired end among them, imagine whom He can use today. A minister of God for good, not because they act good, but because God has a desired end. Then there's Daniel 2. For the sake of time, we'll note briefly that. This is Daniel in Babylon. He's been taken captivity by the next nation that will rise to power, the Babylonians, and he's in the service of Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar has a dream, tall image, gold, silver, brass, iron, and iron mixed with clay. Nebuchadnezzar not only expects them to tell him the interpretation of the dream, he tells his wise men, tell me what I dreamed. Now there's a hard-headed fellow that's going to put everyone to the test. Ultimately, Daniel is able to tell Nebuchadnezzar both the dream and its interpretation. And as he does so, Daniel 2, beginning in verse 36, but moving forward in summary fashion, Daniel says, Nebuchadnezzar, you are the head of gold. Wherever men live, God's put you over them. You are the head of gold. The first part of the image, the golden head, was Nebuchadnezzar. And after you will arise another kingdom inferior to you, and then a third kingdom. Daniel, in explaining this image, dream that Nebuchadnezzar had, says, you, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, are the gold. After you comes silver. By the way, the silver kingdom that would supplant Babylon is known as the Medo-Persians. Following the Medo-Persians, who overthrew Babylon 539 BC, there will arise the Greeks, followed by a fellow named Great. His mama named him Alexander. I'm not sure why the middle name was the. But here comes Alexander the Great leading the Greeks. Around 327 BC, they conquer Persia. And then, fast forward to 146 BC, there's a fourth kingdom. Remember, it was gold, silver, bronze, Greek being the bronze, and then iron, and iron mixed with clay. 146 BC, there's a little group of folks called Romans that ultimately overcome the Grecian Empire and expanse of it. And it's during the days of these kings, the Romans, the Caesars, Daniel 2:44, that the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed. It shall not break in pieces and fall to others, but it shall break those in pieces. And of this kingdom there shall be no end. God would use the empire of Babylon, the empire of the Medo-Persians, the empire of the Grecians, and the empire of Rome to bring about His desired end of a kingdom that would have no end. What kingdom was that? The church. Good luck finding morally upstanding leaders among those nations just enumerated. Yet God is able to use ungodly leaders to accomplish His will. In fact, He would even give one by name in Isaiah's writings 150 years before the man was born. His name was Cyrus. Isaiah 44:28, Isaiah 45:1. God can use ungodly leaders to bring about His desired end. By the way, that's not always a comfortable proposition, but it's always a righteous one. Not only can God use ungodly leaders to accomplish His will, but He can use godly leaders to accomplish His will. We think about some of the things said in Scripture about the kind of leaders God wanted His people to have. Exodus 18, beginning in verse 19, God would tell Moses to appoint men that were of age, that were godly, that feared the Lord. There were stipulations regarding the background and backbone of those that should have been leading. David, inspired in some of his final days, would say, 2 Samuel 23:2, the Spirit of the Lord spake by me, His word was on my tongue, the Rock of Israel spake unto me. And he said, He that rules among men must be just, ruling in the fear of the Lord. there's a proper mindset that will give people the leadership that they ultimately need, but that mindset is only going to be effective when ruling people that fear the Lord. People with a semblance of reverence for God. God can use godly leaders to accomplish His will. We think about the qualities for leaders throughout Scripture. Question. We've had some brethren in our generation, in past generations. It really rose to a major debate about the time of America's Civil War. The question of whether a Christian, a member of the Lord's church, can serve in government. How many people want to stand up and say, the civil government is a minister of God for good, but God's people cannot be God's ministers for good? David Lipscomb took that position. If someone is in a position to be a minister of God for good, how could we possibly say that a Christian is exempt from serving in such a role? By the way, we're not only talking about the highest levels of government, we're talking about the various representatives of government. Peter would talk about not only rulers, but magistrates and governors, varying levels. Christians can serve in every form of government or every capacity of government that fits the bill of a minister of God for good. There are some that say Christians can't be law enforcement officers. Really? So we would rather have lawless enforcement officers everywhere. The minister of God for good. Paul would make the point, 1 Corinthians 6:3, know ye not that saints shall judge the world? And if we're going to judge the world, can we not be judges of these little things? Can God's people serve in a capacity of leadership? Absolutely. It'd be great if more would. Oh, it's hard. It's hard to be an honest person serving in a dishonest government. But a dishonest government will never embrace a semblance of honesty until more honest people are influencing it. The purpose of civil government is to be the minister of God, and indeed it can be. God can use ungodly leaders as His ministers, and usually that's going to be bad news. God can use godly leaders as His ministers. Minister of God. Minister of God for good. Romans 13:4, He's the minister of God to thee for good. Question, what is meant by for good? The English Standard translates this as for your good. Time won't allow us to look at a build-up as this occurs in Deuteronomy. But God, through Moses' inspired speeches, would encourage the children of Israel to live a certain way that they might prolong their days. That it might be well with them, that it might prolong their days. That they might live long upon the earth that God was giving to them. Deuteronomy 4:1, 4:26, 4:40. We could also see it in Deuteronomy chapters 5 and 6. Go to Deuteronomy 10, 12, and 13. Moses would actually say, and now Israel, what does the Lord thy God require of thee? But to fear the Lord God, to walk in His ways, to serve Him, to love the Lord thy God with all your heart, and to keep the commandments of the Lord thy God, which I command thee this day for thy good. What was meant by for your own good? Prolonging their days. Eating of the work of their hands. Enjoying life in general. Life, choice, enjoyment. There's a document that's familiar to about 8% of Americans today that says all men are created equal. Say it's familiar to about 8% of Americans today because so many have forgotten everything about it. All men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. What are those rights? Life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. Can we call those rights unalienable? Is life an unalienable right? Acts 17:25, Paul said, God gives to all men life and breath. Is life a gift given by God for all that live? Yes. An unalienable right, a right that I can neither forfeit nor surrender without some sort of crime. Something that can't be given away. Yes, life is a right. In fact, we think about the words of Genesis 9:6. What was the condition of the world before the flood? Anarchy, would that describe it? The imagination of the thoughts of men's hearts were only evil continually. The earth was filled with violence. So God told Moses, I'm sending a flood. Murder had been so multiplied and amplified. Violence. As they came off the ark, remember God's words to Moses, Genesis 9:6, whoso sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. For in the image of God made he him. Before that, there was no exercise of a death penalty. In fact, the first murderer had received a mark and exile. His name was Cain. And he whined about the severity of his punishment. His great-great-grandson Lamech would boast about having killed a man to his hurt. And the spiral continues. To the point that by the time we get to Genesis 6, all the thoughts of man's hearts are only evil continually. Violence fills the earth. And after God sends a flood, Noah and his family exit the ark. God institutes the death penalty. Men have a right to life, and that right is only forfeit by those that disdain the proper rights of others, including, and in this case, the shedding of blood, particularly the shedding of innocent blood. Now, a minister of God for good is one that is going to uphold the right to life. What about those that don't? When they are no longer God's ministers for good, that is, good morality, they might just be God's ministers for our own good, and that is bad news. So, there's the right to life. We understand it, we talk about it. What about liberty? Has God always given man liberty? He put Adam in the garden. He said, dress it and keep it. And then he said, Genesis 2:16, of every tree of the garden thou mayest eat freely. Adam, you can eat what you want to eat. But of the tree that's in the midst of the garden, of the knowledge of good and evil, thou shalt not eat of it, and the day thou eatest thereof, thou shalt surely die. Isn't it interesting that God did not put an impenetrable force field around that tree? The only thing He put around that tree was a rule. Thou shalt not eat of it. Thus He gave Adam and Adam's future bride a choice. God gives man choice, the right to liberty, the right to choose life, death, blessing, or cursing, Deuteronomy 30:19. God gives man the right to make a choice about how he's going to live. Jesus even reflects this in the call to follow Him. Enter ye in at the strait gate. Wide is the gate and broad the way that leads to destruction. Many there be that enter in thereat. Strait is the gate and narrow the way that leads to life. God renders men life. And He renders men the liberty to choose. When we take away from one another the liberty to make those reasonable, relevant choices in life, then we enslave one another. Exodus 21:6, when God had just given the 10 Commandments, He then begins to speak to Moses about the treatment of others and their property. and the law is given pertaining to him that stealeth a man. This is kidnapping. This is human trafficking. God has always opposed that sort of behavior. And shame on the nations and those that claim to follow God that exercised it for so long. We're not talking about people voluntarily surrendering themselves to a situation of service so that their needs are met, which, by the way, has happened throughout history, is discussed in the New Testament, and actually given guidelines whereby it can be done in a godly way. See Ephesians 6. 1 Timothy 5 and 6. We're talking about situations where people are against their will, without committing any sort of crime or transgression or immorality, put into bondage. That has never been God's desire. Wait a minute, what about those people of the land of Canaan when the Israelites came into that land? Have you done a study of how ungodly those people were? By sending the Israelites into that land, God was saving the Canaanites from themselves. Their societies were so permeated with iniquity. No. When we talk about the idea of human bondage and captivity, God has never endorsed it. Liberty has always been a right that God expects the innocent to be able to enjoy. Life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. Pursuit of happiness, that sounds selfish. Well, that depends on how we look at the idea of the pursuit of happiness. Adam could eat of any tree of the garden, Genesis 2:16. Hey, Adam, whatever tickles your fancy, whichever one seems to taste best. Adam could pursue happiness in deciding whether to eat an orange or an apple, but it was that forbidden fruit he ought to have avoided. Adam would have to work with the sweat of his brow as a result of his sin, Genesis 3:17 through 19, but he still had the right not only to work, but to pursue fulfillment in his work. Adam has two sons initially, Cain and Abel. Cain, a tiller of the ground, Abel, a keeper of sheep. Why did they choose those? Because each was pursuing the route of occupation that was most fulfilling and suited to him. Cain wasn't wrong for being a tiller of the ground. Cain's wrong came into other considerations that time will not allow us to pursue, but we'll pursue happiness. Solomon said to do it. In fact, Solomon, throughout the book of Ecclesiastes, one of the key aspects of what he has to say is that the ability to enjoy the labor of your hands is a gift from God. Ecclesiastes 9:10, whatsoever your hands find to do it with all your might. Yes, ultimately the conclusion of the matter is fear God and keep His commandments. But one of the key aspects of what's fulfilling in life, it's not about what I achieve, what I accumulate, what I accomplish. Life's a journey, not a destination. Thanks, Aerosmith. That's a good line. And as such, it's about enjoying the work that's being done instead of measuring success by what gets stockpiled. The pursuit of happiness. Enjoying life. Doing that which is fulfilling. Paul would tell Timothy, 1 Timothy 6:17, charge them that are rich in this world that be not high-minded, neither trust in uncertain riches, but in the living God that gives us richly all things to enjoy. God has given us the opportunity to enjoy life. We could look at other New Testament passages. Paul and Barnabas had the right to pursue resources and compensation for their work just like anyone else. 1 Corinthians chapter 9. Let him that stole steal no more, Ephesians 4:28. But rather let him work with his hands, doing that which is good. That's the pursuit of proper profit, beneficial income. And every soul has the right to pursue such. A minister of God for good is going to be one that upholds life, liberty, and a proper pursuit of happiness. Not one that is willing to strip life from the innocent. Not the one that's looking toward that which God has given as a good gift is not the one that's looking to strip liberty, nor is it the one that is looking to strip the pursuit of happiness or fulfillment from others. By the way, this could actually pertain to possessions as well. Remember Matthew 20, Jesus made the point in giving that parable of the laborers. While is your eye evil because I'm good? Am I wrong for doing what I want with what's mine? Or you think about Peter's words to Ananias, Acts 5, 3 and 4. While it remained, was it not your own? And after it was sold, was it not in your own power? Ananias, your funds and your finances and your holdings are yours to decide what to do with them, not anyone else's. Now, we can decide to live in a place where we are properly taxed and understandably taxed in order to benefit from the protection and provision that government supplies, absolutely. But it's also going to be incumbent upon us in looking at what God has to say about government and its roles. We render unto Caesar that which is Caesar, absolutely. But we can also recognize when government exceeds its mandate. And once again, remember, He's the minister of God to thee for good. And if it's not for that which is good, it might be for our own good. Final thought. The purpose of government is to be the minister of God for good, and the minister of God for punishment. He bears not the sword in vain, Romans 13:4. He's a revenger to execute wrath upon the ones that do evil, Romans 13:4. Wherefore he must needs be subject not only for wrath, but also for conscience sake. Brother Mosier is going to discuss the idea of they that resist next week, but for now, please consider this. When it comes to the idea of punishment, Christ endorsed criminal justice. Matthew 5, 25 and 26, He said, agree with your adversary quickly, lest your adversary take you to the judges. Here's a scenario where Jesus endorsed the concept of the potential of incarceration. In fact, Matthew 18, when He gave the parable of the unforgiving servant, He referred to the possibility not only being taken to a life in prison because the man owed 10,000 talents, but to a tormentous imprisonment. Deliver him to the tormentors, weeping and gnashing of teeth. Jesus didn't say no prison should involve such difficulties. There should be no incarceration. He used it as an illustration of the fact that there is indeed punishment. Incarceration wasn't an impressive system in Jesus' mind. It was an opportunity to illustrate the recompense that comes from violations. Christ endorsed criminal justice, and Christians have to embrace it. We've already read Romans 13, 3 through 5. We could talk about 1 Peter 2, 14, to execute punishment. But for now, when Peter wrote, they wrote under the reign of Nero. In fact, within 7 years of Paul's writing, and perhaps within about a year to 2 years of Peter's writing, Nero was going to start turning Christians into night lights on the streets by making torches out of them. Nero, an abominable abomination. Yet under his reign, Peter and Paul wrote a minister of God for good. Saints today need to beware of systemic unruliness toward law officers if the inspired apostles could pen such words under the reign of such a fiend. Saints today need to be careful about their activism that would denigrate the position of the very offices that God has put into place through His providence. Paul didn't oppose the death penalty. In fact, he said, if I've done anything worthy of death, I refuse not to die, Acts 25:11. Now, we could ask questions about when it's deserved, but one thing that's worth noting is this. Biblically speaking, innocent blood, sexual deviancy, and unpunished violence were 3 areas of iniquity that God said would defile a nation. Perhaps those ideas need to be kept in mind when we look at the kind of punishments that ought to be recognized in a society, particularly the shedding of innocent blood and the unpunished violence are the sorts of transgressions that will reverberate throughout generations. Who has God put into authority? It's not about who, it's about why. He's done it as a minister of Him for good. The question is, are we going to exercise an influence upon the nation around us where we are doing everything we can to put the best possible people into position that is going to be for the overall good? Or will we succumb to a mindset that's so greedy about gaining from others that we end up getting what's for our own good? Thank you for your time this evening.